Without telling the book, I would rather people read through the book themselves to see how they respond to their traumas, their money scripts, their money narratives, as you mentioned in the book. But could you give us a high level overview of your framework of the three E's that you use to overcome financial trauma?
Yeah. So the three E's, it's funny, was developed before I had the language to describe financial trauma. And I'm just like, oh, this makes sense. Like, I'm going to fit this right here. But the three E's stand for exposure, education, and execution. The three E's in particular, and I'm not sure if I included this in the book or not, I think I did, was born out of the process of my purchasing a home. So I mentioned so much about what are the drivers for that for me. The exposure piece was realizing that it was possible for me to buy a home, right? So what is this concept of home ownership? Seeing, peers within 5 years of my age own homes, and reading the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, and like, oh, like, okay, this is the process, right? This is what I have to do. Okay, I need to become aware of my credit. I need to improve my credit. I need to have a down payment. Like, understanding what is this idea of home ownership and what does that mean for me. So that was exposure. Education was, of course, getting educated on the process, learning of the ins and outs of, who I need to have involved, what is it I need to have prepared, what does it take for me to get qualified, all those things. And then execution is actually doing it, right? Pulling the trigger. I was in between the education and the execution phase in this home ownership process, or the pursuit of home ownership, rather. I've been looking for a house for maybe a year and a half at the time, and I was getting really frustrated with the process because A, there were two houses that I had put offers in that had fallen apart, and I'm like, this is not going to work. But B, I think there was like this rush in my mind. Like, I wanted to buy a house by the time I turned 25, and I had turned 26 already, and I'm like, is this ever going to happen? But we started moving forward in the process. I had gotten pre qualified. I submitted my paperwork. I submitted my bank statements, all the things, right? And then I started to get cold feet. And I started wondering, like, can I afford this? And not just from a perspective of, can I afford this right now? But like, this is taking all the money that I have right now. What happens if 6 months down the line I need to replace the roof, or I need to buy a new furnace, or I need to, do XYZ thing? I don't have anybody that I can call in my family and ask for 5 grand, 10 grand, 15 grand. Like, how am I going to be able to bail myself out of the situation? And I almost allowed these thoughts of what if to talk me out of the purchasing process. And so the execution phase is the most important, because I just paused because I was thinking, like, do I want to stake my flag here? But I think the execution phase is the most important, because that's where a lot of people get stuck. There are a lot of people who are very knowledgeable about the process to accomplish something financially. But when it comes to the application, they get stuck. And what helped me get across the finish line in that instance was this idea of community, right? I had people around me who were like, hey, we understand your concerns, and you may not have immediate family that you can call on that can bail you out, but we won't let you fail. And it was that reassurance that allowed for me to move through the process with confidence. And, the funny kind of irony of that concern was everything that I was worried about happening ended up happening at some point, right? I needed to replace the roof. I needed to replace a water heater. I needed to replace a furnace, right? And I didn't realize at the time of purchasing that, homeowners insurance was a thing, and that I could submit claims, and that, a lot of these things would be covered out of the insurance pocket, and, just I would have to pay the deductible. But I just imagine what life would look like for me today if I allowed those thoughts of what if to stop me from moving forward in the home buying process. And so I took that framework of moving through those emotions and that process and applied it to this idea of overcoming financial trauma, because not only is it just something that I thought up, but it was something that I worked through. And so I fill in the gaps in this book, and through the work that I do, really what I talk about, what I socialize, how I communicate with clients. with those as kind of pillars in that experience. But of course, adding in, many of the evidence-based practices that show up in financial therapy, that show up in financial counseling, that show up in financial planning, and helping people to, visualize, recognize their safety first off, right? I'm safe in this moment. Visualize what a plan for the future looks like, and then walk through the steps of accomplishing it. And some people are capable of doing that on their own. Some people are capable of going back to the communities that they come from and using that as kind of an anchor. And some people need handholding. And I think that, there's a charge on all of us as financial professionals to be that person, to hold the individual's hand when they are experiencing that shaky foundation, particularly if there's somebody like me who doesn't come from a community of people who have resources to support them in their undertaking. Because what I found on the other side of those three E's is that I've been able to then pull people forward based off of the overcoming, the act of overcoming, right? So I could trace, I want to say 6 home purchases through the experience of overcoming that fear, right, of that trauma, and purchasing a home myself, by then being for the other people what this group of people were for me, and that's community.